Pablo Picasso, a groundbreaking and prolific artist of thousands of paintings, sculptures, and other works, showed his brilliance from an early age. Throughout his career, his art went through several distinct phases, as did his love life. He's reported to have said, "There are only two kinds of women, goddesses and doormats." The women Picasso adored appeared in his paintings. Some bore his children, and almost all his affairs ended in tragedy, as if there was a dark side to loving the artist. His granddaughter, Marina Picasso, wrote in her memoir, "His brilliant oeuvre demanded human sacrifice. He needed the blood of those who loved him, people who thought they loved a human being, whereas they really loved Picasso." The lives of the many muses of Pablo Picasso are history that deserve to be remembered. Picasso said, "When I was a child, my mother said to me, 'If you become a soldier, you'll be a general. If you become a monk, you'll end up as the Pope.' Instead, I became a painter and wound up as Picasso." He learned the basics of art at his father's studio, but his talent surpassed his father's abilities when he was still young. Picasso's first word, according to his family, was a shortened form of pencil. Picasso created compulsively, drawing and sketching for hours at a time until collapsing, exhausted, to rest and then start again. His prodigious talent earned Picasso a spot at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts at San Fernando, but he dropped out soon after being admitted. Picasso moved to Paris, where he honed his abilities even further and made friends with many of the artists there. He lived in poverty with the bohemians of Paris, burning some of his early creations to stay warm. He is remembered for, among other accomplishments, as being one of the co-founders of Cubism. The unique art movement is considered by some art historians to be one of the most influential art developments of the 20th century. Cubism takes everyday objects or scenes, breaks them into their component parts, and then examines those parts from different viewpoints, creating geometric shapes and surreal designs. The creations evoke a strong response in the viewer, which seems to be unique to each person, because of the way the human brain struggles to fill in the blanks left by the artist. Picasso seemed to innately understand this one-of-a-kind interaction between art and everyone who views it. He said, "The pictures live only through the man who is looking at it." One of Picasso's first muses, Fernande Olivier, met the artist during his struggling early years in Paris. Olivier, born Amélie Long in June 1881, had a difficult past. She was born out of wedlock, which was far more problematic during her lifetime than today, and raised by an aunt and uncle. When they arranged a marriage for her, Olivier ran away and married a man of her choice, who was abusive. She fled this marriage and hid from her husband in Paris, changing her name to complete her escape. Olivier met Picasso in 1904, when she was modeling for many of the artists of Paris. She was described as strikingly beautiful and caught the eye of many of the bohemians with her lovely features. Picasso said he used Olivier as a model in 60 of his creations, including the model for the sculpture Head of a Woman, and as one of the women in his provocative and groundbreaking work, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. The rest of the women in the portrait, he claimed, were prostitutes. Les Demoiselles shocked the art world, with French artist Henri Matisse proclaiming the portrait was not only a crime against art, but a personal affront. Despite, or perhaps because of, the visceral reactions to the creation, Picasso and his art was catapulted onto the world stage. Olivier and Picasso's love affair lasted for 7 years. She adopted a 13-year-old girl in order to create a family with the artist, perhaps in an effort to secure his affections for herself. But Olivier returned the child to the orphanage after she discovered graphic and nude sketches of the girl by Picasso. Olivier ended their relationship soon after. Later in life, and struggling to escape poverty, she published a series of articles about her relationship with Picasso, who had gone on to such incredible fame. Picasso sued to prevent the publication of the articles and was eventually successful. Forgotten, nearly deaf, and suffering from crippling arthritis, Olivier lived on a small pension provided by the artist until she died in 1966 at the age of 85. Marcel Embarr, who was called Eva Goel by Picasso, was Olivier's friend in Picasso's next notable relationship. Like most of his relationships, Picasso was obsessed with Goel and was known to have signed some of his works "I Love Eva" during their time together. Goel, for her part, helped organize and clean Picasso's home, except for his studio, which he refused to straighten. She was also helpful to the artist in his business enterprises, assisting in the sale of pieces and encouraging Picasso to add more color to his creations. She was with Picasso for 4 years, seemed to experience little of his more negative moods. Goel said, "To look at him, you would think he would be violent, but he is really like a lamb." Sadly, Goel developed tuberculosis and died at age 30. Picasso was despondent, but found comfort in the arms of Gaby Lespinasse, a 27-year-old who lived nearby. Picasso didn't introduce Lespinasse to his friends, and few knew they even had an affair until she sold some of his paintings in the 1950s. The affair was not just kept secret because Goel was on her deathbed, but also because Lespinasse was dating an American named Henry Lespinasse, and she'd already taken his name. They married a year later. Picasso gave her some beads and a few paintings, one of which had a passionate note attached to the frame that said, "I've asked the good God for your hand." There were some watercolors and sketches of rooms where they purportedly carried on their affair that supposedly had erotic inscriptions by the artist, but which were thought to have been etched out by Lespinasse to protect her reputation. Olga Koklova, a tall Russian ballerina, was the next notable muse in Picasso's life. He met her after designing the set and costumes for a ballet Koklova was performing in. Shortly after she began a relationship with Picasso, Koklova injured her foot, and, though it healed after some time, she never danced in public again. Nearly a decade younger than Picasso, Koklova was descended from Russian nobility, expected a commitment of marriage from Picasso before she would sleep with him. He acquiesced, and Koklova gave him his first child, a boy they named Paolo. Koklova believed in a well-run household and disliked some of his more bohemian friends. She hired a chauffeur to drive Picasso around and insisted that he live more like the famous artist that he was becoming. Koklova was a jealous wife, but she couldn't prevent him from having his affairs. The unhappy marriage peaked when Koklova discovered Picasso had been in a 10-year-long affair with a girl next door named Marie-Therese Walter. The relationship had started when Walter was only 17, and now she was pregnant with Picasso's child. Koklova demanded a divorce, which Picasso was unwilling to give. Instead, she relocated to France, remained technically married to the artist for the rest of her life. Koklova developed cancer, died in 1955. Towards the end of her life, she asked to see Picasso again, but the artist did not go to see her or attend her funeral. Marie-Therese Walter, a Frenchwoman, gave birth to Picasso's daughter, Maya, in September 1935. Walter's depictions in Picasso's works are noted for the bright colors he used. She is credited as the muse for a collection of 100 etchings that Picasso called the Voyard Suite. Her pregnancy with Picasso's child was captured by the artist in his work Le Rêve, or The Dream. Their child, Maya, was the model for Picasso's Cubism-styled portrait called Maya the Doll. Picasso moved in with Walter for a period of time, but 2 months after the birth of Maya, he met Dora Maar, his next muse. He carried on affairs with both women, then 26 and 28 years old, to the artist's 54 years. There's an apocryphal story that Walter came to Picasso's studio when Maar was there, and the two had a literal wrestling match over who would be with the artist. Picasso was said to have remarked that the wrestling match over his attention was a choice memory, but later Picasso and the women denied the incident had ever happened. Picasso went on to pursue his relationship with Maar and many others. When Koklova died in 1955, Picasso called Walter and asked her to marry him. She refused. Despite being younger than Picasso, Walter wouldn't long outlive him, committing suicide in October 1977, a mere 4 years after the artist's natural death. There was speculation that she committed the act because of her lingering attachment to Picasso. Dora Maar, whom Picasso considered more of an intellectual equal than Walter, worked closely with the artist. She was a talented painter and photographer, notably photographing the disastrous results on many Americans of the 1929 crash on Wall Street. Maar opened a studio in Paris, working in commercial photography for a time. She also held solo exhibits, and her work was published in Parisian magazines. Maar's birth name was Henrietta Theodora Markovich, and she was raised in Argentina by Croatian and French parents. The promising photographer was introduced to Picasso in 1936, shortly after she was working as a set photographer on the film The Crime of Monsieur Lang. Journalist Jean-Paul Crespier described Maar and Picasso's first meeting in a cafe. She kept driving a small pointed penknife between her fingers into the wood of the table. Sometimes she missed, and a drop of blood appeared between the roses embroidered on her black gloves. Picasso asked Dora to give him the gloves, and locked them up in the showcase he kept for his mementos. During their 9-year affair, Maar was a muse for and worked with Picasso on some of his art. Maar painted a few of the pieces of Picasso's masterwork, Guernica, a work in which he started to express his feelings about war and its horrors. She also documented Guernica's creation. The portraits Picasso created of Maar were noticeably darker than those for his previous muse, Walter. One of the more famous ones, The Weeping Woman, was depicting Mar. Picasso says he thought Mar was always a weeping woman for him. Part of Mar's misery may have been due to the fact that she was unable to have children. When Picasso eventually left Mar for his next muse, she sought therapy, including electroshock treatments to soothe her heartache and deep depression. Mar expressed the darkness in her heart when she said, "After Picasso, only God." Sadly, Picasso was said to have physically abused Mar during their relationship and then teased her about his other women after their relationship ended. He shared erotic artwork he had done of her body, even though she wanted to keep it private. He bought her a house, which she lived in for a while, and she died a virtual recluse in 1997 at the age of 89. Since her death, the world has only started now to rediscover the paintings of Dora Maar. When she was with Picasso, he insisted she paint in his favorite Cubist style, but later, during Mar's time away from the artist, she was able to paint in her own style, preferring landscapes. A retrospective of Mar's work was shown in Paris from June through July of this year. Francoise Gilot, a talented and ambidextrous painter, met Picasso in the spring of 1943. Picasso was at a restaurant with Mar and friends when Gilot sat at another table with her own friends. He brought over a bowl of cherries and introduced himself to the beautiful young woman, who was only 21 years old at the time. A few years later, Gilot and Picasso moved in together, and she bore the artist 2 children. She served as the model for the painting, the Femme Fleur. Their relationship ended in 1953, with Gilot walking away from the artist, one of the few, if only women in Picasso's life, to do so. She wrote a book about their time together. Life with Picasso was incredibly popular and sold over 1 million copies in its first year. Picasso tried to prevent the book's publication, but failed. He reportedly was so enraged over the book that he disinherited he and Gilot's 2 children because of it. Life with Picasso was republished by the New York Review of Books Classics in June 2019. Perhaps in retaliation, Picasso told the art dealers he worked with not to purchase any paintings by Gilot in an effort to stall her career, but she continued to paint. Gilot went on to design sets and costumes for productions at the Guggenheim. She married artist Luc Simon in 1955, but they divorced in 1962. She then married Jonas Salk, the researcher behind one of the first successful polio vaccines. Gilot, in her 90s now, is still alive and exhibiting her art. In a feature interview in June of this year by Thessaly Laforce for the New York Times Magazine, Gilot said, "The most important thing in life is to be true to yourself. You can be true to others if you have time." Picasso saw his final muse, Jacqueline Roch, at a party in 1961. He was 72 years old, and she was 26. She refused to date him at first, knowing his poor reputation with women, but he ardently pursued her. He sent her a rose every day until she relented. Roch's childhood was rather tragic. Her father abandoned the family when she was very young, and her mother died when Roch was only 18. She married at 19 and had a daughter, but Roch's first marriage didn't last. When she finally agreed to have a relationship with Picasso, she told him if he took another muse, she'd leave him in a heartbeat. They married in March 1961 and remained together until Picasso's death. He created more portraits of Roch than any of his other muses. When the artist died in 1973 at age 91, witnesses said Roch was so upset that she slept on the snow-covered grave where they buried Picasso's body. She never got along with Picasso's 4 children and argued with the rest of the family over Picasso's property. Roch endured life without Picasso until 1986, when she committed suicide. Pablo Picasso is arguably one of the most prolific artists of all time, almost maniacally creating art throughout his entire life, which lasted 91 years. The genius of his vision is still readily apparent even years after his death. The women that modeled for him and inspired some of his most famous artworks had their lives overshadowed by his great talent. In 2015, Picasso's work, The Femme d'Auger, version O, sold at auction for $179.4 million, highest amount ever paid for an artwork up until that time. And that's not even considering the cost in broken hearts and lives that Picasso left in his wake. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.